Yo, live on the set. I'm your host, Brother Jeremiah with Real Talk Radio LLC. Where I talk, it's always real.
Very simple answer to one question. Do you hate all white people?
I don't think it's a fair question. The white man doesn't even come into my attitude. Mr. Muhammad teaches us to love our own kind and let the white man take care of himself. For a white man today, sir, after kidnapping millions of black people from Africa, stripping them of all human characteristics and relegating them to the role of cattle or animals, commodity, merchandise that could be bought and sold at will. And then 100 years since the Emancipation Proclamation, using every type of deceptive method to further us into slavery, called second-class citizenship, I think that it would take a whole lot of nerve for white people today to ask Negroes, do they hate me?
Can I have your name and badge number?
Well, come here.
My name is Gonsalves.
What's your name and badge number,
It's right
please?
there. Are you filming it?
I said passe to you.
Okay.
Could you please have your sergeant to come by, please?
I will. But you need to come here for a minute because I'm going to talk to you.
What's your name and badge number, please?
10511. Now step outside here at the church. She's going to talk to you.
Hold on.
I gotta
Okay.
take my name.
And can I have your name and badge number, please?
Hey, Evans.
Who?
Evans.
Okay.
All right, now let's
Thank
go.
you.
Let's step outside.
Thank
And I'm
you.
Deputy Mentz. Okay? And
May the 6th of 2016, President Obama sent a letter to every school district in the United States. And President Obama said, every child has a right to use the bathroom of the gender that they identify with. And President Obama threatened the state departments of education. If you don't let transgender children use the bathroom of the gender they identify with, we will cut your funding. We will cut your money. We will cut your grants. And so Barack Obama, more than any other politician in the world, fed the transgender movement.
Your name and badge number.
Sanderson, 59. Like I said, everything is being recorded right now.
I understand, but I need this for my own. You said Sanderson?
Yes, 59.
Oh, 59? And what's your name and badge number, please?
4770.
What's your name and badge number, please?
8320.
Now, you do understand the law, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you do know when I said, he who has passe during these times of impasse is the new passe. No, I get that.
These people are full of the devil. These people can't even be reasoned with. These are not people that you can talk to, and they already have given their soul to the devil. Are you with me? These people go through seances. These people drink blood. These people sacrifice children. Somebody said they don't do that. They sacrifice children at the highest levels in Hollywood. They drink blood of young kids. This is a fact. That's why the next thing to be exposed will be all the pedophilia that's going to come out of Hollywood and come out of Washington, D.C. The human sacrifice and the cannibalism has been going on for years. Somebody said, oh, they don't do that. It's worse than what you think. You remember when the whole spirit cooking thing came out? That's commonplace, ladies and gentlemen. And many of the Hollywood actors that you go see on a screen, what you don't know, they bring a witch. They do a big seance right there on the set, and they worship devils, and they allow devils to come into them before they take the part of what they're going to act.
What we're actually seeing is the systematic implementation of the fall of the Republic and the rise of the corporation of the United States. Every major event is a step in the ladder to achieve that end. COVID is just another rung in the ladder, which is why there's a deliberate mixing of all the wordplay, right? I mean, we should stop calling it, quarantine. That's a term designated for people that are verified sick. This is a house arrest mandated by the state. You should stop calling it, social distancing. There's nothing social about forced isolation. We should stop saying safer at home when millions of Americans don't have basic necessities adequate to fit their needs. It assumes that everybody's home is equally as safe as the people that are making the statements. We should stop saying, this is for the greater good, right? When you close the economy, killing millions of businesses that families have worked generations to establish, that's anything but good. We should stop saying this is the new normal. That's just blatant mind control drivel. There's nothing normal about forced isolation, treating your neighbor like they have the plague, breathing your own bodily waste, wearing masks, living in constant fear of contamination. That's normal. I mean, after all, if the virus is so deadly, why hasn't it wiped out the homeless who don't social distance, wash themselves regularly, let alone, live in or have access to a sterile environment? Last year, 1.5 million people died of tuberculosis. Why were you not wearing a mask during the tuberculosis pandemic? You were endangering, public health and safety along with billions of other people around the globe. So why didn't you wear a mask? I'll tell you why. Because the mainstream media didn't tell you to wear a mask. Right? And so because though 1.5 million people died from tuberculosis, there was no tuberculosis pandemic any more than there's a coronavirus pandemic. What you're really participating in is a beta test for AI systems and facial recognition. See, these cameras work best when people are, distance apart. Now they're actually testing through machine learning how to recognize, a face that's partially covered. It's also a way to easily determine who's compliant and who's not. Who does the propaganda work on and who it doesn't? Now get this, there's some ironies that are here, right? A society that kills millions of babies a year for convenience has shut itself down to prevent adults from dying. People that on the one hand slaughter babies in the womb by the millions are now preaching to the masses about the sanctity of human life. It's double speak, double talk. It's the two doctrine policy. One for the initiated, one for the uninitiated. One for the inner circle, another for the masses. It's like saying, if I violate the stay-at-home order, I can be arrested, but you're letting convicted criminals out of prison so they don't get coronavirus. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. If there's a real pandemic, does it require, faulty virus models, rigged test results, 81% false positives, inaccurate news reporting, staged hospital overruns, manipulated death certificates? Nope. When the government shuts down, millions of small businesses, but doesn't lay off any government employees, it's not about the health. When the state bans dentists from practicing but deems it necessary for abortion clinics to stay open, it's not about your health. When the state prevents you from buying seeds for your garden but allows you to purchase lottery tickets, it's not about your health. An institution that, has the ability to destroy all of Earth through, alleged nuclear warfare should not regulate personal self-defense. An institution that's caught trafficking drugs shouldn't be able to regulate plants. An institution that's racked up $23 trillion prior to coronavirus in debt shouldn't be allowed to manage the retirement fund. An institution that was caught spreading STDs should not be allowed to run healthcare. If people are really concerned about public health and safety, in general, but they don't care if people eat garbage, drink poison, smoke cancer, and take prescription drugs, but think that toilet paper, hand sanitizer, and masks are going to protect them from the boogeyman coronavirus. This is a special kind of stupid that I can't address here. You should ask yourself a couple basic questions. When did you consent from you creating a government to serve you to you serving the government ruling over you? If you want to know, who's in charge, just think about who you can and can't criticize.
I have a guest by the name of Rabbi A.B. Finkelstein. He's off the east coast of the United States, who's going to be joining me tonight. Rabbi A.B. Finkelstein, as I said, a rabbi off the east coast of the United States. Are you there with me tonight?
Shalom, I am here.
There's a lot of rumors and conjecture that's taking place across this country relating to the Jewish population, okay?
Okay.
The masses have a hard time believing anything.
Well, we've done a great brainwashing job on them over the centuries, and especially the last few hundred years. We've just brainwashed them completely. They believe anything we tell them. And, in the meantime, we have a lot of fun around Passover where we steal the children. I mean, we steal 100 to 300,000 children a year just here in this country. And we drain the blood and we mix it with the Passover bread. and then we throw the bodies into the slaughterhouses that we own, and we grind up all the bodies in the sausage and the hamburger. McDonald's is one of our favorite outlets, and the people, they eat them for breakfast, they eat their children for lunch, and as Jews, we gotta do it. So honestly, to bring it out into the open so that you can see it for what it is. You've been teaching the people real good, but they don't wake up, do they? Because you know why? They're scared of us Jews, because they don't want to be called anti-Semites, and they believe that we're the chosen people, and so that's why we can do whatever we want to do, and we can get away with it, cowards. And we go to the synagogue all the time and have some Manischewitz and dance the Hava Nagila.
America's 60 Families. Ferdinand Lundberg wrote,
"The United States is owned and dominated by a hierarchy of its 60 richest families, functioning discreetly in a de jure democratic form of government, behind which a de facto government, absolutist and plutocratic, has gradually taken form. This de facto government is actually the government of the United States, informal, invisible, shadowy."
Among the 60 families Lundberg named were the Rockefellers, Morgans, Mellons, Vanderbilts, DuPonts, Astors, and Warburgs. Through inherited fortunes, they remained entrenched in power from one generation to the next. These families frequently acted in concert to pre-select presidential candidates of both Republican and Democratic parties, and, as Lundberg documented, acquired sweeping ownership of America's major newspapers.
For the last several decades, let's admit, the powers that be have pretty much been the ones that have really made the decisions irrespective of the will of the American people.
This power structure has been called the establishment. Syndicated columnist Edith Kermit Roosevelt, granddaughter of President Theodore Roosevelt, described it.
Establishment is a general term for the power elite in international finance, business, and government, who wield most of the power regardless of who is in the White House. Most people are unaware of the existence of this legitimate mafia, yet the power of the establishment makes itself felt from the professor who seeks a foundation grant to the candidate for a cabinet post or State Department job. It affects the nation's policies in almost every area.
In America, in principle, power is supposed to belong to the people. Voting sustains the public perception that it retains power. However, the establishment has ways of getting around our electoral system. First, through their influence within the major parties as well as the media, they can usually predetermine the Democratic and Republican nominees for president.
For years, I would tell people, if you don't go vote, you haven't got any right to gripe about what goes on because you're just not even part of the process. But I've quit saying that because now, even if you do go vote, in many instances, it doesn't really matter.
Oh, and I love the baloney that they keep shoving out every election. You know, if you don't vote, then you get what you deserve. No, if you vote, you get what you deserve. A lesser of two evils? What sick person would vote for a lesser of two evils?
In 1976, Jimmy Carter was elected president. 7 months before the Democratic convention, the Gallup poll reported less than 4% of registered Democrats favored Carter for president. Outside Georgia, where he was governor, few people knew who he was. What happened?
There's a new mood in America. We've been shaken by a tragic war abroad and by scandals and broken promises at home.
Carter received a media blitz, including adulatory pieces in the New York Times and a Wall Street Journal editorial declaring him the best Democratic candidate. The TV networks inundated the public with his image. Before the nominating convention, his picture appeared on Time's cover 3 times, and Newsweek's cover twice. Time's cover artists were instructed to make him look as much like John F. Kennedy as possible. How did Carter acquire this media following? It began with dinner at the Tarrytown, New York estate of David Rockefeller. Present was Zbigniew Brzezinski, who helped Rockefeller found the Internationalist Trilateral Commission. and whom Carter would later appoint National Security Advisor. Senator Barry Goldwater said of this meeting,
David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski found Jimmy Carter to be their ideal candidate. They helped him win the nomination and the presidency. To accomplish this purpose, they mobilized the money power of the Wall Street bankers and the media controllers.
Carter thus received the nomination. A similar process has anointed campaigns of other major party presidential nominees of the last few decades.
The people have no real say, including in who is elected to office in this country. I mean, consider this. In the United States, about 50% of the population are no longer affiliated with Republicans and Democrats. So 50% of the population is not voting for Republicans or Democrats. Tell me which national election, member of the House, member of the U.S. Senate, a president has been elected in the last 100 years who was not a member of one of those parties. Now, how is it possible that half the country isn't voting for Republicans or Democrats because they're not affiliated with those parties, and yet those are the only two options that we still have? I mean, I think that demonstrates to people how corrupt the system is, because you are literally kept from having any other option and any other choice.
Because of the manipulation of the mainstream media, public education, most of the entertainment world as well as the political world, so many of the American people are sedated, and they do not engage in the areas in which they could make a difference.
The good news is, I think we're hitting a tipping point where the people, you're now hitting critical mass, obviously, when you have 50% of the country that's no longer a part of it, where, it just takes a very small minority now to really push things in a different direction.
We had George Bush trying to get reelected, and John Kerry was his adversary, alleged. As it turned out, there was massive electronic vote fraud in one of the swing states, Ohio. It turned out that John Kerry actually won. It was given to Bush. A year or so later, there's a young law student down in the University of Florida, and John Kerry is speaking down there. And the law student had the cojones to go over and get in front of the microphone when they asked him, when they opened it to questions. And he asked John Kerry, how come he didn't make more of a squawk about this?
And he says you won the 2004 election.
Right.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? You won in 2004.
It was obvious he had won. It would have made the difference between not only him being president, but the different party would be in. And it was a very powerful question. You know what the response was? John Kerry gave a little nod or something, because the next thing we know, there's a goon squad of about 6 that come and drag the young law student right out of the auditorium.
However, the establishment has an even more powerful means of influencing the will of the people. The most important is the Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR, headquartered in New York City. Though virtually unknown to the public, the Council dominates cabinets of both Republican and Democratic presidents.
When you look at where the wires are connected to the centers of power, you will find again and again that places like the Council on Foreign Relations don't just float ideas, they provide solutions.
You often find members of the Council on Foreign Relations being appointed to various positions in government or industry, for that matter, and you see them in the revolving door going back and forth between business and, regulatory agencies and stuff like that. The big question is, how substantive is the CFR on global affairs?
Since its founding in 1921, the CFR has produced 21 Secretaries of War and Defense, 19 Treasury Secretaries, 18 Secretaries of State, and 16 CIA Directors. And what is the Council's goal?
The Council on Foreign Relations is a fairly interesting entity to me. And the reason for that is because they have so many members of the CFR who are in media.
I think the CFR exerts tremendous influence over our government, our media, and our centers of education, more so than most people would want to admit.
The Council on Foreign Relations is a very important nexus point, but it's just a vehicle for the larger aims of those who have an agenda. But it's an important vehicle. It's a ring of power that is an engine to encircle the whole world.
You know, once in a while there'll be a spokesperson on major media, and he'll be introduced as such and so, and they'll give credentials, and they'll mention a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. But that just, it sounds so innocuous. They just pass it. Oh, it's some council that deals with foreign policy. So people don't remember that.
The number one thing people need to know is that when you have so many members of media who are a part of those organizations or that organization, you have lost the ability to have anyone criticizing globalist agenda or globalist viewpoints because they are members of an organization that pronounces its view is to create, globalism.
They have seized upon foreign policy, economics, and trade to get around the bounds of the Constitution and put their global system on top of America.
When I wrote The Shadows of Power, the main concern I had was that maybe I'd gone too far in attributing our foreign policy to this invisible government. Now it's 26 years later, we've had the arrival of the internet, we've had access to information I never had access to at the time I wrote that book. And my conclusion is that it's not that I went too far, but I didn't go far enough. When the Council on Foreign Relations was formed, and the decision was made at a dinner at the Majestic Hotel in Paris in 1919 after the bankers got the word that the Senate had rejected the Versailles Treaty, so we weren't going to become embroiled in the League of Nations. So there was an organization created. It was in Britain, it was the Royal Institute of International Affairs. In America, it was the Council on Foreign Relations, like sister organizations.
These roundtable groups were put into formation to steer nations and steer their policies, rather than control them overtly through direct leadership. They worked through secret maneuvers. The Cecil Rhodes Secret Foundation Trust had been involved not in nation building, but in nation manufacturing in the southern part of Africa. And now they wanted the entire world.
Now, how do they control American government policy? The number one way is by serving as a recruiting ground, the recruiting ground for cabinet-level positions. You've probably noticed that a lot of people in U.S. cabinets come from the big multinational corporations. How does that happen? Well, the Council on Foreign Relations will invite executives from Citibank or Exxon or Halliburton or Bechtel into the council. They'll attend maybe a study group, attend some dinners, hear some speeches by people like Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski. Now they become experts on policy, and now you see them showing up in the State Department or another major department. When you have one organization controlling the cabinet with a uniform viewpoint, whether the president is Republican or Democrat, naturally you're going to get uniform policies.
Here are some of the prominent members of the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations. George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton, Sandra Day O'Connor, Dick Cheney, Les Aspin, Colin Powell, Robert Gates, Brent Scowcroft, Jesse Jackson Sr., Mario Cuomo, Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, David Brinkley, John Chancellor, Marvin Cowell, Diane Sawyer, Barbara Walters, Cyrus Vance, Paul Volcker, Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, Bruce Babbitt, Howard Baker, Samuel Berger, Elaine Chao, Dianne Feinstein, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Chuck Hagel, Gary Hart, John McCain, George Mitchell, Bill Moyers, Jay Rockefeller, Donna Shalala, Strobe Talbot, Fred Thompson, Robert Zoellick, Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey, George McGovern, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, John Anderson, Walter Mondale, Michael Dukakis, Al Gore, John Kerry, on and on. I mean, you notice first of all that you're talking Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals. You're talking people in every area of government and news media. You're talking education establishment. You're talking basically the key establishment institutions of the country are all infiltrated with Council on Foreign Relations members. Why is this institution so powerful that no matter whether it's a Republican or a Democrat in the White House, they are going to fill their administration with members of the CFR?
Admiral Chester Ward, former Judge Advocate General of the U.S. Navy, was a CFR member for 16 years. Before resigning in disgust, he stated the Council's objective.
Submergence of U.S. sovereignty into an all-powerful one-world government. This lust to surrender the sovereignty and independence of the United States is pervasive throughout most of the membership.
This is a man who was also invited to become part of the CFR and was a member for a few years until he recognized what the CFR was all about. After finding that out, he withdrew his membership from the CFR, and then he did his best to inform the American people as to what the CFR was all about.
The Council's journal, Foreign Affairs, has pushed for world government for over 90 years. In its first year of publication, 1922, it declared, "Obviously, there is going to be no peace or prosperity for mankind so long as it remains divided into 50 or 60 independent states. The real problem today is that of world government."
When you put all of that together, you recognize that the CFR, the Trilateral Commission, is nothing more but an elaborate attempt to, as they say themselves, make an end run around national sovereignty, diminish the independence and autonomy of the United States, and merge it into this global governing institution that they, of course, foresee themselves running.
My goodness, we're going toward everybody having a little bit and nobody having a whole lot, except for the elite. And we're going towards seeing all of our jobs taken away and put into another country. That's your world government for you. That's not benefiting the people in this country. So I absolutely, I abhor the idea of world government. And I'm afraid that what we're going to see is the demise of many of our countries in the attempt to formulate this one big structure.
And it's obvious to see, okay, there are these very rich and powerful people meeting at, under the guise of the CFR or the Bilderberg Group or a bunch of other things. But it really doesn't matter. The fact is the superclass exists. That's the problem.
So whether it's a Brussels, whether it's a World Trade Organization, whatever it might be, it's still built on the premise of how do we steal the most amount of money that we can, put it in the hands of the fewest, and tell everybody else what to do.
It's not primarily driven by political ambition. It's driven by economic ambition. And just the fact that I mentioned that might change the flavor of the conversation, because talking about economics is a little bit different than just talking about politics. And one of the reasons, again, that the American experiment here is not working too well right now as far as Congress is concerned is because Congress is not an economic animal, it's a political animal.
What is world government? Simply stated, one regime ruling the planet.
I don't think anything's intrinsically wrong with the one world government. In fact, I think obviously we are just one humanity, and eventually we're going to get to that. I can see perfectly well that there'll come a time when somebody's going to say, "Hey, where are you from?" You're going to say, "I'm from Earth." Okay? But the problem is, are we going to do this voluntarily? And are we all going to agree that we're going to have a world government and that we all have some sort of representation and the thing's done equitably?
It's not that you Jews are hiding anything. You're coming right out on television, in the newspapers, on the radio, and you're telling the people exactly what you're going to do before you do it, and they're brain dead.
Well, we did a good job with the public school system. We got you to put all of your children in there. You notice that the Jew doesn't put his children in there. They go to the Hebrew Academy where we teach them the real things, and then they go to the synagogue and they learn the real important things. But we send your kids to the public school. We even have you tax yourself from your property so that you never own your property. And so if you don't make your property tax, we're going to take your property. You can bet on that. And we have you put your kid in a 12-year babysitting is about all it does, because you don't learn anything. And then by that time, the kids, they get to be teenagers, and then we give them the music. Not that we really want to call it music, because, oy vey, that's not music. But they listen to that, and then they want to do what they want to do, and so we sell them drugs, and we make a lot of money off your children. Your children, from cradle to grave, All we do is make money off of them. Your cattle, your goyim, the human cattle. Mazel tov.
Well, that's very interesting. I understand that, but I also know the bloodletting. I know that on your Passover, which isn't mine, that a lot of little children do disappear, and I do know that, and I know a lot of police departments and agencies have been informed, but you're very open. You're very open tonight. I'm very surprised that you're talking about the bloodletting of the little children, that you put their blood in the matzah balls, and that you eat it on sacrifice on Passover.
Well, there was a goyim that wrote a book about it back in the 30s. I forget his name at the moment. But anyway, he wrote the book. People didn't buy the book. People don't want to listen. We've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years, since down to Adam's time. We take the children of our enemy, and we bring them to the basements in the synagogues, where we drain the blood and watch them die there. It's very similar to how we do the sacrifices that we do with the kosher butchering, and so we do that, and then we mix it with the Passover bread, and so we eat the blood of our enemies. And the bodies, we're not cannibals, so what we do is we take those, because we can make some shekels, and we give them to the slaughterhouses, and those are pounds and pounds and pounds of meat that we grind up in the sausage and the hamburger, and that's why we made those the most popular things, sausage for breakfast and hamburger for lunch. And so all the goyim out here are really eating their children. And even when we say this outright and tell you people, you don't believe it. So that's your problem. But you goyim out there, you never teach yourself. You don't self-teach. You're always looking for somebody else to do it for you.
It was built in 1977, so it's really old. In fact, it's been around there for a long time. But my first lead that something was strange was this window, and I said, that looks like an eye. It looks like a serpent's eye. So I dug a little deeper, and when I saw the audience hall from the back, where the back audience was seated, it really did take my breath away, since what was revealed was this right here. That is a giant, massive reptilian face shaped into the direct architecture. Everything from the slits in the eyes to the scales to the fangs, there was no mistake about it. But what's behind this hinted symbolism? And what can we see or glean if we dig deeper? Well, number 4, look at where the Pope is seated. We see him here from the back of the hall, that he's in fact seated in the mouth of the serpent or reptilian. In the very mouth. This is symbolic of the Pope being the voice of the serpent, in fact speaking the serpent's words to the audience. This might well shake your faith, that is if you're a Catholic, which I was. I actually went to Catholic school myself and was an altar boy. But here you can see it in plain view. Clear symbolism, clear evidence that something here is extremely wrong. This image hasn't been photoshopped. This is real. This is built right into the architecture that was designed by those within the Pope's inner sanctum. But there is more symbolism. For this, though, we have to go outside. Number 3. Do you see anything strange here? You're looking at the hall itself. Do you see anything weird? Well, if you look carefully, it looks like the head of a giant snake. Can you see it now? In fact, it's almost unmistakable. You can see the snake's muzzle at the front, and you can see its eye. It just looks like a snake. To me, this is yet more connective symbolism that what's going on inside matches the outside, because since here we can see serpentine architecture with ease. Number 2, let's head back inside and look at what the Pope himself sees. If the Pope is seated where he is, what does he see? Well, he sees a giant serpent with eyes once again. The audience is symbolic of almost the serpent's meal, and the Pope is not preaching to the audience under this symbolism, but the giant god-like reptilian creature himself. Why? Because this is what the Pope sees. Can you imagine that when they were designing this, that they designed this all by mistake? That this is some kind of high anomaly? No, because they spent literally years on the designs. They definitely would have known what the Pope would have seen from where he was actually speaking. Also what the audience was seeing. So this is very strange, and it raises some serious questions. What is going on in the...
Name and badge number 10511. Now step outside.
هذا